Welcome, everyone. Today we are going to be learning about health and healing from the perspective of the Torah. In the short time that we have, of course, we cannot get into every single matter, but hopefully I can present a general introduction to different attitudes and different writings about health in the Torah tradition, in Jewish tradition. So we're going to start with a verse in the book of Exodus, where it is talking about if someone injures someone else, then it's their responsibility to pay for them to have a doctor to heal them. And the language in the Torah is a double language. A double language is always a language of emphasis. So it says, Rapeh yirapeh. You will certainly heal this person. And the sages comment on this very interestingly, saying this verse gives permission from the Torah to a doctor to heal. Now, we might think, well, isn't that obvious that if someone is sick, they would seek out treatment, healing, and a doctor has the right to heal. But the Talmud asks a very, very charged question. And it says like this, it's a rhetorical question. And it says like this, if God is running the world, and if everything is the way that it should be, then if someone is sick, who are we to interfere with their sickness? In other words, the question is more or less, if a person wasn't supposed to be sick, then they wouldn't be sick. And if they are sick, isn't it between them and God? Who are we to try to change the situation? That's the question. Now we have to understand in the Talmud, everything are questions and answers. It doesn't mean a person believes in the question, but a question is posed in order to get the answer. And the Torah answers this idea that even though a person is sick, and one could say, and there are traditions in the world, there are spiritual paths where if a person gets sick, they just take it that this is what's supposed to happen to them. And they don't necessarily seek medical intervention. So the Gemara says, no, that's not how we see it. It's not our job to determine why a person might be sick. It's our responsibility to try to heal them. Now, this is a very, very important discussion. Again, it's something that we might take for granted, but it's not necessarily taken for granted by everyone in the world. So it's very paradoxical because on one hand, Jewish tradition does teach that everything is the way it's supposed to be. But on the other hand, we're told we're not supposed to accept the world as it is. Our responsibility is to try to fix the world, to rectify, to heal, to bring light and love and comfort to the world. So it's very paradoxical because, for example, when someone dies in Jewish tradition. So right at the burial, we say different verses, basically saying God is the true judge, and we accept the judgment. Now, this could be a loved one who not necessarily reached the age of 95, and you can expect that they will pass away. Even in a case of a sudden death, we should never know, we still say that God knows what he's doing and everything is for the best. Well, if everything is for the best, then who are we to try to change the world? So I hope you're understanding the paradox that I'm presenting here, because it is a paradox and they're both true. Everything is the way it's supposed to be, and God does the best for us in every situation. On the other hand, we're told we shouldn't accept. If we see injustice, we should work to correct injustice. If we see someone in pain, it's our responsibility to try to heal them, to do whatever we can to help them. So all of this was just an introduction to this idea that the Torah gives permission for a doctor to heal. Okay, I hope your interpreter is good and everyone is following what I am saying here. Okay, so now I want to show, if everyone sees the chart that I have here. So this chart is of the, in fact, I'm going to go like this. This chart is of what is called the Sphirot, the 10 divine emanations from which the world is created. We cannot go into that right now. Some of you are familiar with this idea, some are not, but each one of these is a channel through which God creates and maintains the world. Sometimes it's called the DNA of the world. If you look at it, you could imagine the DNA code that is in every cell of the body. Now, why am I pointing this out? Because the middle one here, you see, it's the middle between above and below, and between right and left. It's in the middle, and it connects with virtually everything. And this one is called Tiferet, which means beauty and harmony. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because anytime we want to understand a concept in Jewish thought, we always look at what is the root word? What does the word actually mean? So the same letters that form the root word of this divine emanation, Tiferet, when the letters are permuted or switched around, it is the same letters of healing, refuah. So that's very significant, because what this shows us, and this is what we're going to continue, that good health depends on harmony, depends on what's called the middle path, not too far to this direction, not too far to this direction, not too high, not too low. In other words, everything needs to be balanced. So what does this have to do with good health? Let me say, listen to this. This is sitting weird. So one of the most famous doctors in Jewish history, who is also one of the greatest writers of Jewish law, was Maimonides. Maimonides lived 1,000 years ago. In his day, he was not only a famous philosopher and codifier of Jewish law, but he was also a doctor. And he wrote many, many things about good health. And the main thing he was saying was balance. Not too much of this, not too much of that, not too hot, not too cold, not too sweet, not too bitter, not too much, not too less. In other words, everything that he was saying had to do with a harmonious lifestyle that did not go to the extremes, especially in eating. He was a very, very big proponent of not overeating and not eating too much of this and too much of that, like a little of everything. So with this idea in mind, we're going to look in the Torah. There's really, we're talking about the 5 books of Moses. There's a number of references to healing and health, but there's really only one sickness or disease that is discussed in great length. In the book of Leviticus, there's practically 2 whole Torah portions on a disease that in Hebrew is called Sara'at. Sara'at many times is translated as leprosy. It was a skin disease, but our sages and our tradition tells us it wasn't leprosy. It could appear like a skin disease like leprosy, but it was a result of a spiritual imbalance. And the Talmud discusses, well, why would a person get this disease? And different opinions are given, but almost all of them have to do with someone who is insensitive, who doesn't show a lot of caring for other people, and in many different ways. And especially people who slander other people, who speak evil about other people, who tell bad things and get people in trouble through their speech. And the emphasis is that it's brought upon a person for spiritual reasons. Because when the person would get this disease, they would be put into isolation. Not so much like in our days, not so much because they were contagious, but because this person was insensitive, had a big ego, had lots of pride. So the way to fix this was to remove this person from society, so the person would have a chance to understand what they had been doing wrong and have enough time to reflect on this in order to fix the situation. Now, the part that I want to emphasize is the tradition that this disease was brought by spiritual reasons. Now, until, at least in the Western world, until maybe 25, 30 years ago, most doctors, most means of healing would not take a person's lifestyle or mental state or emotional state into consideration. In other words, if someone has a stomach ache, treat the stomach ache. If someone had a headache, treat the headache. If someone has a heart problem, treat the heart problem. What does it have to do with what a person eats, or if they exercise, or all kinds of things, if they have too much stress in their life? But things have changed radically in the last 25, 30 years. And now it's understood that not all, many diseases come from certain propensities that we have in our DNA code. It's genetic. There are certain ailments or diseases that are connected to our genetic code. But today, most sicknesses that people have are connected to lifestyle and stress. And this is what the Torah was saying. It used the word spiritual reasons, that a person would get sick because of spiritual reasons. But really, it was already saying what medicine is now finding out. In other words, if someone lives a very stressful life, whether it's because of their job, or because of their relationships, or because of their psychological state, or their emotional state, then these have a tremendous effect on a person's lifestyle. People who smoke cigarettes, who drink too much, who take drugs, who don't know how to manage their anger, who don't exercise, don't eat right. All of these things, after many, many years, leads to unhealthy situations. And medicine now realizes that not only our lifestyle choices are going to affect whether we're healthy or not healthy, but these emotional and psychological and mental states of mind directly affect what our health is going to be. And even deeper is our attitudes. So all of this is already really seen in the Torah when it's talking about this one disease that was brought on by a person's psychological, emotional immaturity, and having a big ego, and have lots of pride, and not caring about other people, and being insensitive. And so the Torah is telling us that a person will pay a price for that in their health. And like I said, that's what we see today. And going back to Maimonides, I think everyone knows that there's a great emphasis now on how we eat. That the way we eat has a huge effect on many, many different parts of our health. And this is one of the main things that Maimonides 1,000 years ago said. He was saying that the main factor in a person's being able to live a healthy lifestyle is the way that they eat. What they eat, when they eat, how much they eat, how they eat. If a person eats in a state of stress, so that's going to have a tremendous effect. Okay, so now we're going to take this and move forward to a teaching from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He is the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is the initiator, the creator of the Hasidic movement. Approximately approximately 300 years ago. And his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, so he made a statement, and he was a great encourager of people to be in a state of joy. That even when we have problems and we have obstacles and we have troubles in our life, that keeping a positive attitude and keeping a sense of joy, even when confronted with difficulties, he said this is the key to good health. And he explained like this. He said that when a person, and he connected it to the circulation of blood. And he said that when a person is joyous, so everything in the body kind of flows the way that it should be, especially the blood. He said when a person is depressed, then they become lethargic. Their depression is not just mental. They have a hard time moving. Everyone knows of cases where people who are severely depressed have quite literally a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. Because their body it becomes heavy. And he said that when that happens, the circulation of the blood, which is carrying oxygen and all of the good elements and hormones and chemicals to the whole body, slows down, and it affects one's total health. So he said this about 250 years ago. So here's another thing. Until like 30 years ago, if a doctor would hear this, they'd say, this is ridiculous. Like, what does this have to do with health? But we now know, and they've done many experiments and much research, that if two people, let's say, came down with the same disease, let's say two people had cancer, God forbid, and they had the same diagnosis, but one of them was a fighter. One of them is, I'm gonna fight this. I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna keep a positive attitude. And the other person becomes terribly depressed and begins to lose the will to live and just accepts that there's no hope for me, I'm going to die anyways. But they've done research and they see there's a world of difference between these two people. And they have the same disease. But if someone has a good attitude, a positive attitude, that can make quite literally the difference between life and death, or at least how long a person lives, and even more so, the quality. Let's say both of these people only have 6 months to live, but one spends those 6 months totally depressed and just has given up already, versus the person who accepts that they are going to die, but makes the best of their last 6 months with family and friends and the relationship with God. It's a world of difference. So what Rabbi Nachman said 250 years ago is very true, very true. He said the source of all disease is a lack of joy. Now, it doesn't mean literally that, but he had his finger on the pulse. Now, speaking about the pulse, so I certainly don't know enough as I should, but I do know that in ancient and even contemporary Chinese healing, a lot of it has to do with being able to properly read the pulse, the flow of blood in the body. This is what Rabbi Nachman was saying. And that there are, in Chinese medicine, there are, I've read up between 20 and 30 different signals that a healer can get depending on the pulse that they feel. So there's actually a similar idea in Kabbalah, in the Jewish mystic tradition. And I have to admit that this type of healing has, in a great measure, been forgotten, and people did not receive exactly how to do this. But I want to explain, and it's a very, very amazing thing, is that there was a great Kabbalist, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He's known as the Arizal, and he lived in Sfat approximately 500 years ago. And he was the greatest Jewish mystic in the last 2,000 years. And his student wrote the following of how the Arizal was able to diagnose someone's health situation. So he said that there were 10 types of pulse. Like I said, I believe the Chinese have identified between 20 and 30 different types of pulses. And he also, by feeling the pulse, by putting, just taking the typical pulse, he could identify what the problem was. The question is, how did he do that? So I'm not sure if you've learned about this, but about 120, 30, 40 years ago, the first type of mass communication over long distances was the telegraph. And the telegraph was able to transmit energy over relatively long distances through a code called the Morse code. And the Morse code was made up of lines and dots. But these lines and dots were then translated into letters, and it was almost like a computer code. It was a type of very basic computer code. And through lines and dots, messages could be sent over the telegraph line. Now we all hold our little device in our hand, and we can send messages instantaneously to thousands of people around the world, or just like we're doing now, we're on Zoom, and there are people in many different places who are watching right now, and we're doing this live simultaneously. But the first one was called Morse code, lines and dots. So the Arizal explained that in Hebrew, there are 22 letters, and there are 9 vowels. And these vowels are dots and lines. They're either a singular dot, a singular line, or a combination. It could be a horizontal line or a vertical line. It could be 1 dot, it could be 2 dots, it could be 3 dots. And a few of them combine lines and dots. So he explained that there are these 9 vowels, And they relate. I'm going to show you this again. Here we have what are called the 10 sfirot. Each one of these has a vowel connected to it. Each one. And if you see these lines, between each of the sfirot, these are the 22 letters. There are 22 connecting lines between the 10 sfirot. And according to our tradition, these are the pathways of wisdom with which God creates and maintains the world, is through the 22 letters and the 10 sfirot. So the Arizal explained that each one of these sfirot has a vowel connected to it. And the last one is a combination of all of the vowels. So the Arizal, so when he would put his finger on a person's pulse, he could tell symbolically, was it a line? Was it a dot? Was it 2 dots? Was it 3 dots? Was it a vertical line? Was it a horizontal line? In other words, he knew which vowel the pulse was representing. And then he would then associate that pulse with the appropriate sphera, and each one of the sphirot would then has great meaning to it. And it tells us about our emotional, psychological, spiritual, mental health. And therefore, the Arizal, through the pulse, he could tell which vowel and which of the sphirot, which would then give the diagnosis. So this is an amazing idea. And I would imagine Chinese reading of the pulse is similar in that the healer, when it feels a certain pulse, it tells him like what organ is being affected, what overall problem is there. So it's a very fascinating kind of idea, but remember, this goes back to Rabbi Nachman said, and he said all disease is coming from a lack of joy, which affects the flow of blood, which then affects the pulse, which will affect the pulse. And a lot of this, again, we said already that there's nothing that's 100%. There are certain diseases that are coming from a genetic makeup that we don't necessarily have control over. But as we said, so much of modern sickness, whether it's migraine headaches, it's ulcers, it's stomach problems, it's stress in the neck or stress in the back, or lung problems from smoking, too much alcohol, too much drugs, not enough exercise, not eating properly, too many hormones running through our body because of stress. So all of this affects our health. Okay, now we're going to move on to 2 more ideas. And that is, as we mentioned before, that anytime we want to understand an idea in Torah, we have to look at the words or the letters that make up the word and understand just what do they mean. And that gives us a key to understand. So in Hebrew, the root letters, the 2 root letters of the word for sickness If in Hebrew, if someone is sick, they are called choleh. And the two letters are a chet and a lamed. Disease in Hebrew is called machala, the same root, a chet and a lamed. So the question is, what does this root mean other than as the root words of sickness or someone being sick? So the two letters mean something paradoxical. It's the root for the word weakness, chalash. If someone is weak, they become sick. So the word for weak and sickness is chet and lamed. But interestingly enough, the word for strength and for, in modern Hebrew, a soldier is called a chayal. And this is someone who's strong. So the same root can mean, depending when it's expanded with other letters, could either be weakness or strength. In Hebrew, a corpse, when someone dies, the body is a corpse. That is the same root, chet, lamed, lamed. So when a person is very weak, they end up dying and they become a corpse. And it's all the same root. But again, on the other side, it is a strength. Someone is a chayal means, like I say, a soldier or someone who is very strong. A very, very strong, meritorious woman is called an eshet chayal, a woman of valor, a woman with strength. So what do we learn from this? That on one hand it means weak, and the other hand it means strong. So I learned this from my teacher, Rav Ginsburg, who said we can learn something very important from this, is that if we have the right attitude about when we personally get sick, it could be a minor thing, it could be a cold, it could be the flu, or it could be something much more serious. If we know, if we understand that the body is sending us a signal that whatever you're doing, it's not good. You need to change course. You can't continue like this. A lot of us know that when we get run down and we're not eating properly, we're not sleeping properly, we're burning the candle at both ends. A lot of times we get sick afterwards. Our immune system can't fight against so many factors that are weakening it. So if, though, we have the right attitude about getting sick, we can come out of it much stronger, because the body sent us a signal that if you continue in this way, you're really going to get sick. So fix it, change it. Look at what you're eating. Look at your lifestyle. Go to a doctor. Get healing. So in other words, sickness is what's called a wake-up call. It's the way that the body is telling us there's something really off. You need to fix it. And I'll just use one example, is a fever. When we get a fever, so we feel sick. And if the fever gets too high, a person can get very sick and could even die. And yet, a fever is actually the way that the body is fighting against whatever is wrong with it. In other words, it's in a sense, it's a good thing to have a fever, because the fever is trying to burn out the impurities that is causing the sickness. And that's why when a fever finally breaks, then the person is on the road to healing. So that's true of all of sickness. And what's interesting that Hebrew has a sister language called Aramaic. And in Aramaic, the same root, a chet and a lamed, can mean either bitter, excuse me, bitter or sweet. It just depends, like in what context it's used and what other letters might be added to those two letters, but it means either bitter or sweet. So this is telling us the same kind of idea, is that if we understand what sickness is, then we'll understand that it's a wake-up call, and it could actually take something bitter and it could fix it and make it sweet. So we're going to end with a story and what we can learn from this. So it's in the book of Kings, and it's a story of Hezekiah, in Hebrew, Chizkiyahu. He was a king of Judah, and he was a very, very holy person. But there was something that he did not do correctly, and his relative was the prophet Isaiah, the great prophet Isaiah. And God came to Isaiah and said, "Go to the king and tell him to prepare to die, because his time is up." And Isaiah went and he told the king, and the king explained to him why he had not done a certain thing. And I'll explain now, is that the king had prophetic powers. And in his prophetic powers, he saw that he would give birth to a son who would be very, very evil. And he didn't want to have children. He didn't want to have children because he felt that he had a prophetic vision, and he didn't want to bring an evil son into the world. So strangely enough, Isaiah said, "That's not your business. You have a mitzvah. You are commanded to have children. How the child comes out, that's in a sense, that's God's business. You have to do your best." It turns out that he married, I believe it was the daughter of Isaiah, and they did have this son, and he was named Manasseh, and he became a very evil king. Okay, but back to the story. So the story is, Isaiah said, "Prepare to die. You're going to die." And Chizkiyahu said, "I have a tradition that even if there is a sword hanging on your throat like a guillotine, don't give up hope." And it said that he turned his face to the wall and he prayed. A short time later, Isaiah came back to him and said, "God has listened to your prayer. You will have 15 more years of life." In other words, your prayer changed the decree. This is a very famous story in the Torah. It's explained in the Talmud. But what we can learn from this is, we said before, let's say two people have the same disease, same prognosis, but one has a positive attitude and the other one gives up. It could literally make the difference whether one will live and one will die. And so it's very, very similar with the idea of prayer, that when we pray, this is what helps us have a positive attitude. This is what helps us give us strength to fight and not to give up. It gives us the strength to change our way instead of just giving up, trying something different. Maybe there is a type of healing that will help in this case. And I'm sure you've read, they have done now thousands of tests and research on, does prayer actually make a difference in people's health? And the conclusion by doctors, by scientists, is it absolutely can make a difference. Nothing is guaranteed in this world. I remember, I don't know, maybe it was 10, 15 years ago, but the head story of Time magazine was on this issue. And the conclusion was, to everyone's surprise, most people were not ready to get the results that they got. But they found, and we're not talking about just people praying for themselves, but when other people pray for other people, even if the person doesn't know it, they saw that it actually had an effect. So this is an amazing, amazing idea. Like I said, there's no guarantees. No one promises, as we all know. We may pray for a lot of things. It doesn't mean we will get them. And it doesn't mean that it's actually even good for us. But the act of prayer itself can help with healing. And it could be prayer, it could be meditation. There's a lot of studies now that meditation has a huge effect on not just a person's mental state or emotional state, but on their physical state. They measure the brain waves, and they measure how that affects the different organs in the body, the hormones, the chemicals, all the different parts of the body, the immune system. And they have found that a positive attitude, a joyous attitude, a faithful, a believing attitude makes a difference. So we will end with a blessing now, and then then we will open it up to questions or comments. So I just want to bless everyone simply with good health, and that we learn the importance of a harmonious lifestyle, the importance of exercise, of good food, of a good attitude about life. And we should all experience good health and reach out to others and bring healing into the world.